As you're probably aware, I like designing and building things. Especially when it's a gift for someone else. My mom is someone who doesn't have everything, but she also doesn't need or want anything. So when she asked me to build her a piano bench 2 inches taller than her current one, I was more than happy to do so. I started by taking a few pictures to get the rough dimensions of her bench. Then I went into SketchUp to design the exact same thing, except 2 inches higher. If you're wondering why I bothered to draw this in a 3D model, it's because I find it way easier to calculate the amount of wood I'll need. For wood, I wanted something that was easy to work with but also strong, and something that wasn't pine. I settled with using basswood for the base and a nice piece of brown maple for the top. So my joiner isn't exactly square. I'm still fine-tuning it. So as you can tell by looking at the jointed edge up against the table saw fence, it's a little off 90 degrees, but that's okay. The joiner will give me at least one straight edge, so once I rip the other edge down at the table saw and get two parallel edges, I can then flip it back over and run the jointed edge through the saw blade, making both of them perfectly square. With all my lumber to its final dimensions, I pulled out the planer and got them planed down to their final thicknesses. I wanted the legs to have a slight taper in them. This came with its challenges. I don't have a tapering jig, nor did I have scraps to build one. So I used my miter gauge and set it to 10 degrees and began to cut. As you can tell, this is basically a disaster. Luckily, I had a bit of extra scrap wood, so I used a leftover piece of 8/4 stock and cut it down on the table saw until it was the same dimensions as the other leg. Once I cut it to its final length, we were back on track. This time, when I was trying to taper, I used a small offcut of maple as a spacer in between the wood and the miter gauge. And I have to tell you right now, I do not recommend doing this at home. In fact, I don't recommend doing this anywhere. My fingers got extremely close to the blade, and although at the time I felt confident in my skills and my ability to concentrate, watching this footage back makes me feel really stupid. Do yourself a favor, buy a bit of extra plywood and build yourself a tapering jig. It's not that hard, and it's going to save your fingers. If that's something you guys want me to show you, let me know in the comment section below and I'll make a video on it. Okay, so we have our rough taper and all 10 fingers and thumbs. To make the tapers look the exact same, I flushed up the non-cut ends and then clamped all of them together. This allowed me to sand them to the exact same shape at the exact same time. I also gave them a round over to make the taper more subtle. I'm going to be using 1/4 inch plywood for the bottom of the storage compartment. So I cut a dado into the sides and the ends using the table saw. Then I took the plywood and cut it to its final dimensions using a circular saw and table saw. I made sure everything fit well together. Then I cut notches into the plywood where the legs would run. I used my table saw, which is kind of dumb. I put the saw blade as high as it would go to make the cuts as vertical as possible. But this didn't really work out. I ended up with a cut that was still 3/8 of an inch deeper on the top than it was on the bottom. It's not something anyone will really notice unless they open a bench, but I notice it and I'll always know it's there. If I could do it again, I would have taped off the cut lines to minimize tear out and then used a jigsaw or a handsaw. It would have taken a lot longer, but it would have been a lot more precise. With everything looking like it was fitting well together, it was time to drill some holes for the dowels. I wanted the legs and the sides to line up flush and square, so I first drilled some holes in the side, then inserted some of these metal dowel points. These things are great. You just line up the two pieces you want to attach and then push. The points leave a mark exactly where you need to drill the other two holes, and the point also helps your bit from wandering when you're drilling the holes. And using the dowel jig makes sure that I'm drilling perfectly perpendicular holes to the surface of the wood. This was a really time-consuming process, but everything fit well together, and for the first time I could see exactly what the finished bench would look like. The glue up went exactly the same as the dry fit, except it had glue. I was very happy with it. I didn't do it in stages this time, I just glued and clamped everything all at once. If you're using a softwood, just make sure to remember you have some kind of block in between the clamp and your project. Too many times I've removed a clamp only to find a dent in the project I worked so hard on. With everything looking square, I left it overnight to cure. The next day I gave everything a quick sand up to 220 grit, and then I sanded the maple top to 320 grit. Before applying the finish, I realized there was a bit of movement in the legs, and I wanted to get rid of that. So I took it outside and held the random orbit sander up to it for about 10 seconds, then I came back and checked it. After a few trips in and out of the garage, I had the bench resting perfectly on all 4 legs. To finish the bench, I used one really thick coat of Danish oil. I added some felt feet to the bottom of the bench and attached some hinges to the top. Lastly, I added some rubber stops so the lid wouldn't be super loud if someone slammed it shut. The bench turned out really well. It might not be the best looking piano bench in the world, but it helps my mother's posture while she's playing the piano, so this is very worth it. I learned a ton, and I feel so fortunate that I still have all my fingers. Seriously, do not cut the taper in your legs like I did. Make a jig. I've decided I'll actually do that in an upcoming future build, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching. Thank you.